Hello and welcome. I'm Alas Garjuk and you're watching Head to Head with UATV. Information warfare has become a phenomena much talked about in recent years, and Ukraine's experience is often quoted as a case in point. Since 2014 and the Revoltuion of Dignity, Ukraine has been grappling with external and internal communication attacks on its society and state institutions. The question is, how can one win the fight full of fake news, and how people can organize self-defense from this form of aggression? To answer these questions, we welcome to our studio today Dmytro Kuleba, permanent representative of Ukraine to the Council of Europe. Hello and thank you for being with us today. So in 2018, Ukraine stood out as the most misrepresented country in Russian propaganda and pro-Kremlin media. So Ukraine tops this EU versus disinfo database as the most frequent target from Russian media outlets. Let's just remember this reports claiming that Ukrainian children are forced to play with stuffed adult Hitler dolls, or that Ukrainian students are forced to reject their relatives that live in Russia, or that Ukraine's national church is becoming the Christian version of ISIS. So what are the current dimensions of Russia's disinformation campaign targeting Ukraine, especially keeping in mind that it's less than a month until this presidential election?
You are absolutely right. Ukraine is still number one on the top list of Russian disinformation effort, despite its very concerted campaign against other democracies in the West, because we shouldn't isolate the war of Russia against Ukraine from a broader conflict between Russia and the West, where Russia tries to influence perceptions and emotions of people to distort their perception of reality. All disinformation messages or stories triggered or launched by Russia with regard to Ukraine can be essentially boiled down to two critical messages. The first one is that Ukraine is an inefficient, failed state that cannot exist as democracy. And the second one is that Ukraine is too diverse to remain a united country. Mm-hmm. Any story you take...
The collapse of the USSR continues up until now. That's what they are saying.
Yeah, but, well, you know, the ultimate goal of the Russian Federation is actually the restoration of the political influence of the Soviet Union.
Yes.
So that's what they're trying to achieve, and their ultimate goal is to see Ukraine in their sphere of influence, as they put it. But the main point is that Ukraine was the first country to become the target of the very focused disinformation attack by Russia. But on the other side, we were also the first country to learn lessons of how to fight and repel these attacks.
True. We do speak about disinformation, information war, disinformation campaigns since 2014, basically when the conflict started. We do know that this war was led against Ukraine and has started much earlier than that. But still, could you compare 2014 and 2019? How does Ukraine retaliate on this?
Two completely different universes. I clearly remember the summer of 2014 when I returned to the foreign ministry in my new capacity as ambassador for strategic communications. And unfortunately, what I found was basically nothing. There was no functioning system of communications. And that was not only the case in the foreign ministry. You could take any other institution, government body, and you would find a dysfunctional communication unit or department, whatever it was called at that time. So since then, a lot of effort has been taken, and the existence of your very channel is one of those efforts.
Thank you so
much. Which should be credited, because you're doing a great job to send the message across the world.
That's nice to hear from you.
But also, I think that all in all, the government of Ukraine now and the Ukrainian society in general are more resilient and far more efficient in retaliating, in fighting back Russian disinformation and propaganda than it used to be. Mm-hmm. Of course, there is no kind of final day of victory, because it's a communication war which lasts forever. But the fact that Russia failed to succeed in Ukraine, that we are still moving towards the West, we did not make a U-turn back towards Russia, that reforms are being implemented, that we have a strong coalition of international partners standing by us. These facts prove that Russia has not dramatically succeeded. It has some successes, and it can be credited for that, unfortunately. But all in all, it did not achieve its strategic goal of turning Ukraine into a failed state and returning it back to under the Russian influence.
True. And also it's worth pointing out that people now, they are aware that not everything published depicts truth and reality, actually. And speaking of 2019, I would like to refer now to a recent study by Institute of Mass Information. Specialists were researching how targeted is Ukraine and Russian online propaganda. And the important thing is that it is fresh, and only articles published between February the 8th until February the 15th were reviewed on two top websites, Russia Today and RIA Novosti. So the results are quite interesting, and I would say quite predictable. RT published 183 articles throughout that week, meaning approximately 26 articles about Ukraine per day. And RIA Novosti went even further than that, 327 articles, which equals to around 47 articles per day, or 4 articles per working hour. What is your take on this?
Well, Russia is clearly obsessed with Ukraine.
Yes, I think they are publishing more stuff about Ukraine. They are publishing
some
about
Ukrainian
their life,
that is for sure. Well, the story of Ukraine serves two purposes in Russia. First, it diverts attention of people, of Russian people, from internal problems to outside problems. Ukraine is being portrayed as a place of chaos and disorder and decadence. So a Russian viewer who watches TV or reads, or a Russian reader of news can see that and make a natural conclusion that it's better to have this kind of Russian stability than a Ukrainian version of chaos, as it is represented by Russian media.
So they mock Ukraine.
Well, absolutely. They mock Ukraine. They try to present it in the most humiliating and embarrassing way. And this meets one of the basic messages that I mentioned before, that Ukraine is a failed state that cannot function as a democracy. Yeah.
And at the same time, I would like to remind about threatening messages. The Kremlin's top propagandist Volodymyr Solovyov keeps threatening Ukraine by saying that Venezuelan revolution somehow lets Russia do anything in Ukraine, and that the aggressor state might be willing to go for a large-scale armed invasion. Another thing that Solovyov says on Russian live television is that Ukraine's policy is allegedly pushing Russia to fully occupy Ukraine. So I want to ask you, what stands behind such narratives? Do you believe that the Kremlin and its propagandists are preparing the Russian population for the official war?
I'm certain about that. It doesn't necessarily mean that the war will take place, but it means that people of Russia should be ready for the war.
They're spreading this hatred towards
Absolutely.
Ukraine.
It's a very obvious pattern when you are raising emotions and you are incepting certain perceptions into people's minds in communication space, in order to pull the trigger at a certain moment and see these perceptions and emotions spill over from online into offline. So from online conflict, aggression and hate into a real physical aggression, conflict and hate taking place in real life. So what the Russian propagandists are doing, they're simply keeping the right temperature in the Russian society, keeping it ready for any scenario, any kind of scenario, so that if the full-fledged offensive against Ukraine will begin, the Russian people will be ready for that, and moreover, they will be supporting the action.
Yeah, because it's already boiling.
Because this is the mistake that the Russians made in 2014 when they moved into Ukraine and started fighting the war. They were suppressing any flow of information from the war zone to Russia. But they could not suppress the flow of dead Russian soldiers from Ukraine to Russia. And they immediately received pushback from the Russian society, from the mothers of soldiers, from some civic activists who started raising the issue, and it became apparent that Russia isn't fighting a war in Ukraine. To avoid this non-support, they want to prepare the Russian society for the war with Ukraine, to legitimize it, and to prepare the Russians for paying the price for the war by the lives of Russian soldiers. Again, I do not necessarily say that the war will start, but,
yes. But that's what
they are
doing.
They are preparing the Russian people for that.
And this is very troubling. But let's talk now. What can we do about this information war, especially if we are ordinary Ukrainians, not journalists, ordinary Ukrainians who are experiencing challenges and dividing fake news from reality and distinguishing the true information. So what can Ukrainians do about it? And I do know that you recently published your book that could rule as a manual to do just that.
Indeed, I have it with me here. This is my book. It's called War on Reality: How to Fight, How to Prevail in the World of Fakes, Truth and Communities. I address this book to every person that is willing to maintain his critical thinking and the ability to make informed decisions. My main assumption that we, all of us, live in a world of chaos, of information chaos. But this chaos is being managed by someone. So we have to understand how others are trying to attack us, why they're doing that, what kind of instruments and technologies they are using to influence our perceptions, emotions, and decisions, and most importantly, how to fight back. How every person can fight back and can protect itself from this kind of aggression. This book is has a set of very practical, simple recommendations which every human being can can implement in his or her life.
So it has practical
Absolutely,
rules and recommendations, because information and disinformation, these terms are pretty blurry for ordinary person. I mean, they are accurate, right? The information is an accurate thing, but truth and reality can always depend on some conditions. So you said that there are practical steps and there are rules. Could you please tell us a few main ones, just to have a clue what is depicted in the book?
Something that any of us can do is to learn how to control emotions while reading information. For example, if you see a post on Facebook that outrages you, that makes you to push the share button to further distribute the message, the recommendation is very simple: stay calm. I mean, no one is pushing on you to push the button. In most of the cases, the effort to attack us, to make us move in a certain direction, is based on addressing our emotions. So be very cautious with news and pieces of information which contain strong emotions, which cause you to feel strong emotions. This is essential. Another advice I would recommend is that you have to learn basic rules how to distinguish fact from opinion. This is easy.
How not to get manipulated with somebody else's opinion.
Absolutely. And I understand that it may sound awkward to some of the viewers, but a very simple analogy I can give is the following. All of us know that if we do not brush our teeth in the morning, in the end of the day we will have serious dental problems, and we will have to go to the doctor and pay a high price for that. It's the same kind of stuff with information.
Great comparison.
If you do not start treating information in a responsible way on a daily basis, you will get into huge troubles because of the wrong choices you will be making and because of the loss of ability to understand reality and to distinguish truth from fakes.
Well, also, as far as I know, protection of personal data is disclosed in the book, which is a new thing and freshly realized threat among Ukrainians. Could you please briefly tell us some recommendations on this issue and why is it important?
Well, it's an obvious fact that we consist of our personal data. And companies, politicians, governments, our own governments and foreign governments are chasing our personal data because based on the analysis of who we are, they can better influence our perceptions and emotions. So rule number one is do not leave behind too much of your personal data. How to do it, I have answers in the book, but the rule number one that you have to follow: share your personal data in a responsible way. Do not click on a consent or do not consent to share your personal data on each and every occasion. Treat this issue responsibly, because this is where you disclose yourself to influence.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a very interesting conversation, but unfortunately we ran out of time, although the issues are very extremely important for all of us, not only for Ukrainians, but also for viewers from abroad. Thank you so much for your valuable comments, for the information that you shared with us, and for your contribution for the book and to this fight against Russian disinformation campaign. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Dmytro Kuleba, permanent representative of Ukraine to the Council of Europe. Thank you for watching Head to Head. I'm Oles Gerjuk. Goodbye.